I went to a quiet little bookstore with my grandson to trade an hour of rain for an hour of paper and ink. I expected nothing more than a paperback and a smile. But when my grandson looked up at me and spoke right there between the travel shelf and the memoirs, his words undid years of silence and left me in tears. You won't believe what happened next. Before I begin, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. New York, Tulsa, Phoenix, a small town I've never heard of. I love knowing where your chair is set when you listen to me. I'll be right here on my side of the screen, a cup of tea cooling on the table, ready to read what you write back. The afternoon had that kind of rain I call librarian rain. Steady, careful, like it didn't want to bother anyone. My grandson held my elbow while we climbed the 2 steps into Marcus's place, the bookstore with the blue door, and the crooked bell that always rings half a second late. The sign out front said Harbor Books, and the paint on the word harbor was chipped just enough to make it charming instead of shabby. Inside, the scent of paper rose like warm bread if you're my age, 71, but I'd prefer to think of myself as well underlined. You know that smell? It's not just paper. It's waiting. Marcus looked up from the counter when we entered, and for a heartbeat, I saw the younger man inside him. The one who must have swung the first shelves into place and declared the store open with a grin no one could tell him to tone down. Grace, he said, my name traveling the length of the room like a ribbon. He nodded to my grandson. And you brought your navigator. We're hunting treasure. I told him something with stories that don't mind being read out loud. Marcus's eyes softened at that. He's a careful man, thoughtful in the quiet way that makes you notice the shape of your hands on the counter. I first met him a year ago after the winter when my husband's chair learned to sit empty. Some people think grief is thunder. Mine was snow, falling without sound. I kept coming to Harbor Books because the shelves never pushed, never insisted. They waited. And behind the counter, Marcus waited too, remembering the titles I liked and the way I glanced toward the window when the light shifted. Try the second aisle, he said now, stepping out from behind the register. We just had a batch of novels with voices that know how to keep company. His hand hovered, not quite offering my arm, just occupying the air nearby in case I needed balance. I liked that. At my age, everyone has a suggestion for how you should be helped. Marcus has a question instead. Do you want it? My grandson, his name is Nathan, all knees and sneakers, and the kind of curiosity that flips rocks over to check for salamanders, jumped ahead. He loves the store for the old tin robots lined up on the windowsill, and for the discount basket where he finds every time a book he insists was placed there by fate just for him. We walked between the shelves soft-footed like we were in church. The carpet had a tired floral pattern, and there was a rug by the armchair that never lies flat. I passed my fingers along the spines the way you might graze a fence while you walk, and the books murmured back. Austen, Baldwin, Dian Fallner, Toni Morrison. Company enough for a rainy century. On the end cap, a card read Blind Date with a book. Paper packages wrapped in plain brown tied with red string, each with a few clues scribbled in Marcus's tidy block letters. Coastal town. Second chances. Dog steals the show or road trip, sisters' secrets baked into pies. I picked one up and then put it back as though choosing a life. Grandma, Nathan called, his voice threading through the maze. There's a book with a lighthouse on it. Is that dramatic or boring? Both, I said, turning the corner. Which is why lighthouses do the job. Marcus appeared at the head of the aisle with a stack balanced on his forearm. I have a recommendation, he said, that polite way he has of making a suggestion sound like a note slipped under a door. He held out a novel whose cover showed a kitchen window and an ocean like a folded blanket. It's about a woman who writes notes to herself in the margins of recipes. She thinks she's just keeping track of salt and minutes. She's wrong. I traced the edge of the dust jacket. You always bring me a story about someone finding her way. He smiled a little. You keep showing up at the trailhead. Nathan tugged my sleeve. Can we sit? The chair is empty. He meant the soft armchair beside the local history shelf, the one with a tear in the arm that everyone pretends not to notice. We settled, the book in my lap like a sleeping cat. The rain hummed its patient song against the windows, and pages whispered as other customers turned them. Marcus returned to the register, but he carried our corner of the room along with him. Every few minutes I felt his attention check on us, the way you lean into a conversation, even when someone else is speaking. I began to read and the story did its work. unhooking the wire that holds your day together so your heart can move again. Nathan listened with the ferocious stillness children say for things they don't want to miss. Sometimes he looked at the words. Sometimes he watched my mouth form them as if the syllables were pennies I might drop. Half an hour passed that way. When I closed the book, Nathan rested his head against my arm and said, "Grandma, do you know the color of your face when you read?" I laughed softly. "Is it alarming?" "It's like the lamp," he said. "We in the middle, brave at the edges." I have heard many definitions of love. That might be mine now. We stood to put the book back, but Marcus was already at the end of the aisle, slower than a question mark. He had another volume in hand, older, the paper like a sheet left on the Clovis line one day too long. "I kept this at the counter in case you came in today," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "First edition paperback. Penny Callahan. You mentioned her last spring." I knew the cover before I saw it. A woman in a red coat crossing a street without looking back. My husband used to joke that he fell for me because I walked like that, like a decision. When he was dying, he asked me for a promise I wasn't brave enough to answer. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," he told me. "But don't pretend you don't want anything." I carried that sentence around like a stone in my pocket. Some days I turned it over. Some days I threw it into the lake and went wading after it. "You remembered?" I told Marcus. "I remember shelves," he said, which was his way of saying he remembered me. At the counter, while he rang the books through, Nathan examined the bowl of bookmarks and chose one with pressed flowers that looked like someone had saved a meadow between two pages. Marcus wrapped the first edition in brown tissue as gently as if it were a wound. His fingers were square and competent. I noticed the crescent of ink near his thumbnail like a comma that had escaped. He slid the parcel across to me, and in the movement our hands made an accidental weather. Warm air, then cooler, then the clear understanding that neither of us had the wrong forecast. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it for more than the book. "Grace," he began, then stopped. He folded the receipt like origami. "We're hosting a small reading group Friday evening. It's not fancy. Chairs and tea and pie from the diner next door. You could bring that penny novel if you like or not. Just come if you want." There it was again, the hand offered without touching. I had a whole speech prepared for an invitation I hadn't admitted I hoped for. A list of reasons it would be simpler to stay home, the evening bus schedule, my niece if it rained, who would feed the cat that I do not own, but that visits me so reliably I speak to it like a landlord. My tongue touched the words and found them stale. I could feel my husband somewhere in the shelves raising one eyebrow the way he did when I talked myself out of pleasure. Nathan was the first to answer. He turned to me and with the stern authority of children who are not tired of courage yet, he said, "Grandma, you should go. You always tell me to try the next chapter before I decide if I like the book." I looked at him and the bookstore tilted as if the floor had become a small boat and we were all willing to sway together. I don't cry often in public. I was raised to fold my feelings into tidy drawers. But that sentence tugged the knot loose. I felt my eyes fill and I let them. Ray knows what it's doing. Marcus pretended to rearrange a stack of postcards. He is a skilled pretender in the service of mercy. "I can set aside a chair for you," he said lightly. "The one by the window behaves if you bribe it with a cushion." I cleared my throat to answer and discovered a different voice than my usual one, a shade braver, a touch less careful. "I would like that," I said. "I would like to sit by the window and be bribed by a cushion and a story." Then I laughed because my husband used to tease that I negotiated everything, even joy. "I'll bring pie if he'll make the tea." "Done," Marcus said. He reached for a notepad and wrote the time and the store phone number on a small card. His handwriting was square like his fingers. When he slid the card over, I watched the tiny tremor in the paper. Relief, I think, and hope wearing its best disguise. Nonulence. We stepped back into the rain, which had rehearsed all afternoon for this, a gentle applause. I tucked the penny novel under my arm and linked my other arm with Nathan's. He blinked up at me through droplets on his lashes. We walked to the bus stop, and the city made that low evening sound I swear you can hear only if you've loved it for decades, the sound of it settling its bones. Halfway down the block, Nathan squeezed my hand. I thought he wanted to ask about dinner, so I began. "We have soup at home," but he shook his head. "No," he said, tipping his face to mine in a way that made passers-by disappear. I wanted to tell you something. I stopped under a tree, and Rain found us anyway, polite but determined. Go on, I said. He took a breath so big his jacket lifted. When Mr. Marcus talks to you, he said slowly, choosing each word like a marble he didn't want to drop, you get the same little wrinkle by your eye that you had when you told me how Grandpa proposed. I never saw it since. Not like that. I think you don't have to read alone anymore. That was the moment. Not thunder, not fireworks, just a clean line drawn from one heart to another. I felt the wrinkle form as if obeying a command. My breath left me and returned as tears, warm and silly and entirely right. I held his small damp face in my hands and said, You marvelous boy. At home, I put the penny novel on the kitchen table and stare at it like it might tell me what to do next. My husband used to leave notes on the refrigerator, terrible drawings of soup cans, a cartoon of our dog wearing my scarf, a reminder to buy pears because they are patient fruit. I looked at the blank white of the fridge now and imagined a message appearing there in his crooked print. Go take the good chair. Let someone pour your tea. After Nathan went to bed, I sat near the window and watched the street lamps write their soft gold on the rain. I tried on the word Friday as if it were a coat in a mirror. Too bright, too young, too late. None of those answers fit. The right answer felt like the blind date books with their red strings. Cozy room, fresh pie, second chances. Dog may steal the show. I smiled then, the wrinkle waving hello, and wrote a small note to myself on the receipt Marcus had folded into origami at the trailhead again. Don't pretend you don't want anything. I folded the note and tucked it into the penny novel. That's where you'll find me now, between pages, waiting for the bell above a blue door to remember to ring. And if you're still listening out there, tell me your city. Tell me if you've ever walked into a store for one thing and come out with your heart rearranged. I didn't know it yet, but Friday would hold more than chairs and tea and pie. It would hold an answer to a promise I made years ago, and the beginning of a conversation I'd been too careful to start. The bus was late that Friday evening, as though it wanted to give me one more chance to change my mind. I stood under the awning with Nathan, the brown parcel of Penny Callahan's novel wrapped like a secret under my arm. The rain had stopped, leaving behind streets that smelled of stone and wet iron. The kind of smell that makes you remember places you haven't been in years. When we reached Harbor Books, the crooked bell finally remembered its job and gave a cheerful ring. The store was different that night, though. Lamplight in every corner, chairs drawn close, and a scatter of voices layered like patchwork. A group of strangers, all held together by paper and binding. Marcus moved through them with the easy rhythm of someone who knew where everyone's comfort lived. He spotted me, and that wrinkle returned to my eye, just as Nathan had promised. Grace, he said softly, stepping closer. I kept the window chair open for you. He placed his hand lightly on the back of the seat, a gentleman's invitation without flourish. I sat, and he set a cushion behind me, the gesture careful, not coddling. Nathan darted toward the table with pie, already folding himself into conversation with a woman who was telling him about the book she read as a child when her family crossed the country. The discussion began, a circle of voices spinning around stories. One man read a passage about a father mending a fence, and the whole room seemed to lean into the silence that followed. A young woman described the way her grandmother smelled of lavender and pencil shavings, and I could almost feel my own mother's fingers against my cheek again. When it was my turn, I unfolded Penny Callahan's novel and read a line about walking across the street without looking back. My voice caught, but I kept going. Marcus across the circle let his gaze anchor me without ever interrupting. Later, when the last slice of pie was claimed and chairs squeaked back, Marcus lingered by the counter. Nathan was still talking, showing a stranger his pressed flower bookmark. I stepped forward, book pressed to my chest like a pledge. Thank you for tonight, I told him. It was yours already, he replied. I just put chairs around it. There was a pause then, not awkward but dense like the air right before the first drop of rain. He leaned closer. You've carried grief a long way, Grace. Doesn't look lighter on you. But it doesn't look impossible anymore. My throat tightened. You sound like my husband, I said, voice a threat. Then he was wise, Marcus answered. His hand brushed to the edge of the counter, almost reaching then retreating. Would you like to come back next week? Not for the group. Just you, just us. I'll brew tea, and we can sit with whatever books you choose. The world slowed enough for me to see it clearly. My husband's memory was not a wall. I realized it was a bridge. And on the far side stood Marcus, not demanding, not rushing, just waiting like the shelves. I nodded slowly but without hesitation. Yes, I said. Yes, I would. Nathan returned, tugging my hand. Grandma, he said with that earnest fire only children can carry. You smiled with the wrinkle again. The store emptied around us, chairs stacked, lights dimmed. But something new glowed in me. Something I hadn't worn in years. It wasn't youth. It wasn't denial of age. It was simply the knowledge that my story wasn't over yet. That perhaps the next chapter could still surprise me. On the bus ride home, Nathan leaned against my shoulder and drifted into sleep. I held the penny novel, my husband's promise, and Marcus's invitation all in one arm. Out the window, the city blurred by, a long sentence still waiting for its period. And I thought maybe the best stories don't end at the last page. Maybe they end when we decide to stop reading. But I hadn't stopped. Not yet. And that wrinkle by my eye, it was here too.